Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Very excited to be here with you today. It feels like I haven't been here for a couple of weeks. Just a quick note before we start, don't forget, please review us on Apple Podcasts. If you like this podcast, it helps people to find us. So if you go over there, leave us a nice review, and it will bring our podcast in front of more people. So would appreciate that. Today's show, we're going to be talking about working in college. I have some specific thoughts about this that probably aren't a surprise to those of you who have been listening to the show over time, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about foreign language. And I have to say that if there was a question that I received most frequently, both when I did admissions at Penn and now here in my role at College Coach, it is definitely about foreign language. And usually, when can I stop taking this language? My school requires only 2 years, or, in order for me to graduate, or I'd like to drop it for my senior year because what I'm studying isn't related to foreign language. And as with working in college, I also have thoughts about this, but I think it's always good to bring in some others to share their thoughts. And so I'm really pleased to welcome to the show today, John Nesbitt and Lisa Bromberg, and they are going to, I'm going to ask them, you guys, can you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about what you do at Duolingo, and then also maybe just about Duolingo itself. Maybe John, if you want to start.
Sure, absolutely. Beth, thanks for having us. We're delighted to be here. So my name is John Nesbitt, and I've been with Duolingo for about 4 years, coming up this November, which is hard to believe. I should say, preface everything today. If you hear a baby crying, I'm sorry. That is uncontrollable right now. I am on paternity leave, and luckily my wife was able to step away from her work from home job to watch him for this hour to make sure we could record in a mostly silent space. But yes, been with Duolingo for 4 years. Lisa and I have kind of different roles. And so I work with specifically the Duolingo English test, which if you're based in the United States, you probably aren't as familiar with as a high school student because you don't have to prove your English proficiency to be accepted to a college, most likely. If you are listening or finding this on YouTube or other channels or podcasts around the world, then you probably know about the Duolingo English test and you've heard a lot about it. The skinny real fast is that it's an accessible, adaptable, computer adapted test. You can be taken anywhere in the world with Wi-Fi. You need about an hour's worth of time. Podcast is not about that today, but that's what I do. And specifically, I'm what's known as an engagement manager. So I work with universities across the US, either telling them a little bit more about the test in an effort to get them to adopt the test as one of the options for international students. And if they already do accept the test in lieu of or in parity with the TOEFL or IELTS, then it's really more of a relationship management post. Now, I should say really fast before I let Lisa take the mic that the reason I'm in this role working with admissions officers and directors and deans is that in my previous life, I was an admissions officer at Vanderbilt University for about 12 years. And in that time, I was the co-chair of international recruitment for about 9 of those years, and had the fortunate chance to travel and recruit students around the world. I think I went to something close to 60 countries in that time, and really appreciated seeing all the different cultures, learning about the food, the history. But I really did see a common roadblock and a very common obstacle or obstacles in the way of international students. And so when Duolingo came calling, and it's such an access-driven mission, and with the Duolingo English test, really trying to change how testing works, how access works, I could not say no. And so luckily hopped on, and like I said, I've been here 4 years. I'm delighted to spend some time with you all today.
Awesome.
Lisa, I'll pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you also for having us. We're really excited to be here. I'm Lisa Bromberg, and at Duolingo, I am a Learning and Curriculum Senior Manager, which is to say that I'm one of many learning experts at the company, and I work on the core language learning app that you're probably most familiar with. My role is to lead product teams that focus on our main language learning experience and figure out how to make it more effective. So I guide and advise team members on product changes or developments, always with the goal of improving learning outcomes.
Awesome.
So before Duolingo, do you want me to talk a little bit about what
Yeah,
I
that'd
did
be
before
great.
Duolingo?
I would
Yeah,
love
sure.
it.
So I taught middle and high school French for several years. And then I went on to graduate school where I got a PhD in French studies. And so I've taught world language, French, and a little bit of Spanish, both to high school students and to college students. So I've seen students on both sides of this transition that we're thinking about today. And importantly, I think for our conversation also to know is that I studied abroad in France, first as a high school student when I was a senior in high school, and then again as a junior in college. And then I also worked briefly in France teaching high school English. So I've had a lot of study abroad experience as well.
And a lot of teaching a language as a foreign language, right? So that's very exciting. I perhaps should tap you to help my French get better than it is, because after many years of study, I am not remotely close to being fluent. But that's a story for perhaps a little bit later in today's podcast. So clearly we've stacked the deck here a little bit, right? We've invited guests on who I expected and anticipated would share my philosophy, which is that I do find foreign language to be incredibly valuable and incredibly important for students. I encourage all of my students to stick with foreign language. Most of them do, not all of them do. And by stick with, I mean all the way through to the end of high school. And a lot of that is based on my experience at Penn, where I did expect to see students not only sticking with all 5 major subjects, math, science, English, history, and foreign language, but going to the highest level available in all 5 major subjects. And John, I'm guessing that was not dissimilar from what your expectations were at Vanderbilt. Maybe you could share a little bit more about what you saw as the impact on continuing with foreign language when you were there.
Yeah, absolutely. Beth, very similar to your experience at a highly selective university. We're expecting to see students excel in all 5 areas, not just be pretty good or be really good in 1 or 2 areas, but truly excel across the board. And I think that's an important, perspective for students to have when they're in the admissions process, is to ask themselves, what will the other applicants look like? And if I'm going to choose the easy road and not take foreign language for 1 more year for whatever reason, that might not look so well for me against this other applicant pool. Even if you're at a less selective university, it's still the same. And I think as far as kind of preparing you and how it can impact you, I mean, at the end of the day, spoiler alert for all you students out there, you're choosing to pursue an education for 4 more years, or maybe 8, depending on what you're doing, because you want to learn. You have that desire to join the liberal arts. And another big part of the application process is that we're always, or I should say I don't do it anymore, but as Beth knows, once you do it for a while, as we did, it kind of stays with you for a while. Once an admissions officer, always one. But what admissions officers around the world are looking at, specifically in the US, of course, is that you have a good fit for that university. And any of the universities we're talking about, part of that fit is going to be coming into a liberal arts curriculum. Even if you're engineering, even if you're pre-med, pre-business, whatever any of the pre-fields are, you're still going to have some component that is going to be that liberal arts. And again, hate to ruin the surprise for many of you students, but you're also going to be asked to take a college level foreign language course, maybe 1 semester, maybe a full year. And so you're going to continue on with this education, whether you like it or not. So not only do you want to look your best in the admissions process, but you want to set yourself up for success, specifically success in your first year, even your first semester. And knowing Spanish, French, Portuguese, whatever really well, and coming in and being able to take that first year class and having a good experience and runway into your college experience, I think is a much better path than not taking it, sitting a year on the sidelines, not getting familiar with the language. We know with studying a foreign language, when you take that much time off, it's hard to get back into it. And I can tell you from personal experience, even though I did take all 4 years of high school language, that first year 101 course is still very difficult, even if you have a little bit of understanding coming in. So I think for a lot of those reasons, right, and the admissions process is one of them, but also just in general, if you're coming to explore and to learn and to be curious, we want to see that you're willing to learn and grow and maybe push through that senior year. I don't love the subject as much as maybe math or science. That's fine. Let's still see how you can do in this. It's going to be okay. It's not that big of a struggle.
Right, right. Lisa, I would love to get, as someone who has been an educator and currently now is involved in the education process through Duolingo, your thoughts on how maybe learning a foreign language why that's so important from your perspective for students and for people in general.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that I've thought about a lot, and especially as a French teacher, having to kind of encourage students to sign up for my course, encourage parents to encourage their children to continue with a foreign language. And so there's sort of like a usual spiel here around knowing a foreign language, preparing you to access other disciplines as well. So the words, vocabulary that you learn in foreign language often lays the groundwork for being able to more quickly grasp concepts that you might find in a pre-med program or a pre-law program. Those Latin roots are kind of everywhere. And certainly, if you're thinking about graduate school and GRE and SAT and test taking, like knowing foreign language can really help you prepare you to be successful at some of those other tasks. But then there's also sort of a life reason, I think, to study a foreign language. And what this comes down to for me is really being the type of person who's willing to expand their worldview. And John was sort of alluding to this, that colleges are really looking for students who are interested in growing, who are interested in pushing past a boundary, and who are curious. And it doesn't mean that you need to have shown that you've already been successful at all of those things, but just showing that you're willing, you're somebody who's interested and curious. Really comes out in the admissions process, but it also comes out in all of your relationships. So I think, there's a lot to be said for how foreign language really forces you to kind of train that muscle, that muscle that says, I'm adaptable, I'm open-minded, I'm flexible, I'm willing to think outside the box. And that's something that you can take with you no matter what discipline you ultimately major in, or whatever employment or job or profession you pursue. This is something, these are the transferable skills that you learn in a world language classroom.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the start, I'm a big fan of this, and I can see in my own life multiple different ways in which studying a foreign language or not studying a foreign language has had impact. And one example. What's the thing we frequently hear students say, and quite honestly, I hear adults say it too, when the kids are studying, let's say, geometry, or they're studying algebra, like, when am I ever going to use this in life? And it can be really tempting to say that about foreign language. And yet, right? And yet we live in a country where there are a number of people who speak, there are a number of people who speak languages other than English, but certainly right now I'm in New York City. My best friend, who is a doctor, who practices in New Jersey, but did her training in New York City and has worked in hospitals in New York City, in Florida, in New Jersey, has essentially become fluent in Spanish over the years. Not something, I don't believe she may have taken a year or two of that in college, but really, and it's less because of the patients, although that's a piece of it, but a lot of the people with whom she worked, the nurses, the other hospital attendants, and the different people who work in that field speak Spanish. So she either needs to be able to speak that language so that she can communicate with all those people and perhaps maybe know what they're saying if they are trying to, say things around the corner that she can't understand. She needs to be able to understand that. And it helps her create a really good working environment wherever she is. But it also helps her create a good working environment, of course, with patients when she has patients who speak a foreign language. So for me, there's a great example of maybe you would think you wouldn't need that. You're a doctor practicing in a certain field, and most of her patients they are English speakers. But a lot of the people with whom she works speak another language, and you wouldn't really think about that. And I'm curious if you guys have seen this pop up in other areas of your own lives.
Yeah, I'll just speak to that quickly. Just hearing your story, I have friends who have the similar stories, and but it's just that some of that cross-cultural competencies that you need to have to be successful in the world now, and that's one of them. And being exposed and learning a language helps you open up that door. I mean, for me, it was studying Italian, and then the door really opening up of understanding more about the food, the culture, and all these different examples. And so I think that cross-cultural competency is big. And then I think also, depending on what you're going to do, it could be something like a global organization like Lisa and I work in, where I don't even know how many nationalities we have or languages we have spoken, but it is vast. It's probably, I don't know, Lisa's like almost half of our company. I mean, it's very big. It's a very different place to work. Of course, you might not be going into that, but you might want to explore that option, or you might be going into another field like Beth mentioned. But Lisa, I'll pass the mic over to you to get your thoughts on that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, just to add to that. So, so this past year, my son learned how to read. And I watched his world literally get bigger, right? Like there's signs and there's text and there are words all around us that were just totally inaccessible to him. And now are spaces that he can enter into. It's literally like doors have opened and his world got bigger. And so he has a new independence, right? He's able to tell me what area of the library he wants to go to and direct the show a little bit because he has access to this bigger space, right? And it's a lot like learning a world language. You don't know what you're missing out on if you can't literally see the words in front of you.
Yeah.
You can't even identify that these are letters and they form words and they have meaning and they suggest something or they direct you to something or they're pointing your attention right in a certain way. And so it's hard to even imagine what opportunities are going to come around the corner and what you might miss out on if you literally can't read them, you can't see them in front of you. And so like for me, this kind of comes down to this somewhat cliche that knowledge is power, right? And being able to read is power. Being able to speak another language, identify another language, access another language, that gives you a certain power in having more information, being able to make decisions that are relevant to you because you have the information that you might not have had otherwise. And just being able to engage with the world in this deeper way.
Yeah. Well, oh, sorry. Go, John.
Oh, sorry, but I was just going to say too, I mean, I think in addition to what Lisa's saying, and that's a really cool story, and I can't wait for my children, my two kids to be able to read. Awesome. That's going to be quite a moment. My son just started laughing this week, which has been quite a milestone. But I think two things came to mind. One, in addition to kind of what we've been saying, in many cases, if you're joining a Penn or a Vanderbilt, which obviously everyone out there listening might not be, but you're joining a global campus that has a sizable 15-20% of the campus population is non-US based or not domestic. And so you want to be able to immerse yourself in that, right? And be a good classmate and a colleague to people coming from around the world that you might have a way to communicate or to let them in a little bit and open up a little bit. But, I think for students too, and I used to talk with them at Vanderbilt, I would tell them, all the reasons we mentioned about taking it, but then also just for your own right. Don't you want to study abroad? Don't you want to have the option to be able to do that? And when you go abroad, don't you want to know like even just a little bit of the language, even just one semester or a year's worth of the language, so that you're not missing out on the experience? I mean, I remember when I was, I studied Italian. My own story was I studied Latin in high school because everyone says, right, it's going to help you with all the tests in college and everything, right? And well, it was fine. I liked it okay. But then I chose Italian in college because I knew I wanted to study abroad. And I was studying art history as well. And I remember when I started learning derivation of words, and one of them was nepotism. And then, light bulb went off. Oh my gosh, nepote is Italian for nephew. The popes would give their nephews the most important positions, like cardinals. That's what nepotism means. And there were all these examples of like that. And like Lisa, you just said, kind of my world just getting bigger and bigger and understanding more and more about what was going on. But I always tell students, hey, get to study abroad. And then if you want to stop a language for a while or for a long time, by all means, but you're really robbing yourself of that potential experience and opportunity. And then who knows, as Lisa was just saying, what that experience might lead to the next one, or to an internship, or to a job, or a career opportunity, or a chance to make a difference in someone's life.
And I'm going to jump in here too, because let's say you're listening and you're saying, nope, I don't want to study abroad, not interested in that, not for me. Okay, I totally can appreciate that as well. let me share another experience from my own life where, maybe you do still enjoy traveling. I've traveled a few times. I did also study abroad. I actually went to Paris when I was a junior in college. And I've since gone back a number of times. And one year we went to an area of France that's right on the border of Germany. And when I'm in France, I am 100% not fluent, but I definitely know enough French to kind of get around. And I've been to places where the people I was speaking with did not speak any English, and I was able to get by. But when we went over the border into Germany, we went to have dinner, and truly the menu was, I didn't know one thing on that menu. It was so foreign to me as to be almost mind-blowing. And yet, when I've been to Italy, when I have been to Portugal, when I've been to Spain, I can figure that out because of the similarities. So again, does it open up the whole world to me? But it was very distinct how closed Germany felt just from the perspective of being able to understand what was even on a menu, versus how I felt when I've traveled in countries where they either speak French or they speak languages that have similarities to French.
Right. And
And
I feel
that's been
lost,
cool.
honestly. I mean, when I would go on the road for international missions in our small group and travel in China or Japan or places where I didn't know anything, I mean, you just feel lost and closed off and a little like you're in this bubble of like, okay, let me just get to where I need to go and move. But then, like you said, when you go to a place where you understand the language, for me, it would be when we would get to go to Italy and recruit students. And for those 2 days, I felt like I could help our small group order. I could figure out what time the trains, all those different things. But anyway.
Yeah. It's very empowering too. And Lisa, I like what you were saying about how the world has opened up for your son now that he can read, and how it opens up if you know a language. I think the biggest transformation in me after I went abroad for a semester was less, unfortunately, in my French, which didn't necessarily improve a tremendous amount, but certainly in the feeling of I am an independent person. I lived on my own in a foreign country, and and spoke the language, and I really emerged from that as a stronger, more confident person, and that was exciting for me. And to even recognize it, that it was so distinct in my own brain that I recognized that I was a different person when I returned. I want to shift gears slightly, and
Yeah.
one of the big challenges that a lot of students have in continuing with a language, or one of their perceived challenges, is that I just don't get it. My brain doesn't work that way, or it's hard, and for a lot of students, they don't really like to do hard things. And so, Lisa, I'm curious if you could identify: are there ways in which you might recommend a student who feels like they struggle, for better or worse, in a language, or could use outside help? How might Duolingo, step into that role for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Duolingo is an awesome supplement to the classroom. It's also a great way to start a new language if you want to learn a language that maybe your high school or even your university isn't offering. And the nice thing about Duolingo is that it's very game-like and bite-sized. So if you're someone who feels like, yeah, my brain doesn't work this way, or this has always been a struggle, there are a lot of gamification mechanics, motivation mechanics that are designed to help you stick with it, even when you feel like you're struggling. And little by little, you'll learn, even if you don't realize you're learning. So Duolingo adopts a sort of implicit approach to teaching, which means that we're not gonna sort of pound your head with a lot of lengthy grammatical explanations or meta-linguistic information. Rather, you just play the game and don't think about it. And 15 minutes a day, every day, or most days of the week, let's say, you'll wake up and you'll think, wait, I think I know that, or I got that, or the one that I got wrong yesterday feels easier today. So that's kind of how Duolingo works, and can be a great supplement if you're struggling in the classroom.
Yeah, and I love that. And actually, I had forgotten, and literally until you mentioned that, the gamification of it, that during COVID, when my son was home, his sophomore year, he was interested. We have German heritage in our background, and he took French in high school, and really liked it, and actually had been supposed to go on an immersion trip to Paris in that summer, but of course that all got canceled. But he decided he was going to maybe learn a little German, and he turned to Duolingo for that, and he really enjoyed it because it was kind of a game. And his school didn't offer German, and he eventually, that kind of fell by the wayside when he went back to, having to study the subjects that he had to do for high school. But personal experience with a teenager in my home, found that Duolingo was really great for, like you said, either you're picking up a brand new language or maybe supplementing the one that you are studying. And so if our listeners take away nothing from this other than that the three of us are super passionate about foreign language, here's a very hard and fast takeaway that you could do, which is get Duolingo and start doing 15 minutes a day before you start back to school, and that may help your student improve in the classroom. And so that's a very concrete takeaway that you could have for this. John, you had mentioned when you were introducing yourself about the test that Duolingo offers. In the past, it's really primarily been the TOEFL that international students would take, and Duolingo really is offering a counterpoint to that. And so I'm not sure, we do have listeners from all over the world, and I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that option and maybe how it differs from the TOEFL, or just what makes it maybe a better alternate to those others.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And yeah, for the international listeners out there and audience, thanks for spending time with us today and learning more about this. And if you aren't as familiar with the DET, or the Duolingo English test, then I'm delighted to spend just a few seconds to tell you about it. So sure. Yeah, we're 6 years old. And when we came on the scene, I kind of mentioned a little bit with my intro about seeing all the obstacles in the way of an international student. And kind of before we existed, a student would have to travel to a different city, in many cases, a different country entirely, like our founder, Luis, when he was trying to take the TOEFL and apply to college, and countless other students I worked with during my time internationally. They pay a lot of money. We're talking $300, $400, $500. In some countries, this equates to being like a month of a salary for an average person. And so not only is access key, but just like the physical location of it all, you have to go, or you had to go to a brick and mortar spot. And that was, I think when we kind of started setting our eyes on that, and could we create a test that could really change that, Luis and others at our company couldn't believe that hadn't changed in 20 or 30 years since they went through the process themselves. And so it was long overdue for us to be able to use technology in a way to benefit students worldwide. We were already doing it with the app to help increase and allow education to be free for everyone out there who wants to learn a language. And this is a chance to kind of extend it. And this time it's a chance not to be free, but to be very close to free. And at $49 American, that is the most affordable test on the market. For a lot of students, this is just so simple and easy. For a lot of you out there, you've already been speaking English. And so to certify your English was really an even bigger hassle or obstacle. So for many students out there, it's as easy as, let me just sign up and take this thing tonight. I have an hour and I can get it done. I don't need to prepare. If English is truly your second language, then I don't recommend just signing up and taking it tonight. Take a chance to use the free practice test, to use our free 80-page PDF study guide, and really get prepared to take the test. But the nicest thing is that you don't need to go to a physical place. Like I said before, you just need Wi-Fi for an hour and a laptop that has a forward-facing camera like this. We won't get into the security and everything else that's going on, but suffice to say, just like the language app, we have test takers in every country out there in the world. One of the cool parts about access specifically that we found when we were kind of doing an article last year was that in India, one of the largest markets in the world for education, there are 100 cities that have testing centers. And last year we had test takers from over 1,000, I think it was around 1,100 different towns and cities. And so just right there alone, the access, and now let's show that exponentially around the world. So that's what that is. So if you're an international student out there, or you're an international counselor out there, and this is helpful, then please tell your students to go check it out, see if it's a good option for them. And as I mentioned kind of in what my actual role with Duolingo is, that's one thing that luckily our team has grown, and our team has seen success with getting universities on board. So when I joined 4 years ago, there were, I can't remember the number, 500-600 universities accepting us, maybe even less. and now it's close to 4,000. So
Wow.
that has really changed exponentially during the last few years. And now it's, you say Duolingo English test or DET to a student studying abroad, and they instantly know it. So now there's more of the brand recognition and the awareness that it could be a good option. And for most students, if a school accepts all three of the big tests, then most students are just going to say, hey, why don't I just stay at home and take the DET next weekend when I have an hour free versus all these other steps I have to opt through. So that was maybe a little long-winded. Hope that was okay, Beth.
Well, no, absolutely. And not only the hoops you have to jump through, but what happens if then you get there and it gets canceled for some reason, right?
Oh my gosh, it's canceled, or you're a student with needs and they didn't prepare for you, or there's not a ramp to get into the building. We had a great example years ago when we were still getting more universities on from a student who was applying to Barnard, who went to take the test and she couldn't get into the center. And we gave her, an access coupon where she was able to take the test that weekend and still apply early, and ended up at Barnard and a whole thing. Or you get there and because you're in a room with 30 people and everyone's speaking and has their headphones on, and you just don't perform your best, you have to wait for the results and now sign up to do it all again.
Right.
All in this time, you might not have a spot to actually sign up and take the test. So there were many, I think, inefficiencies that hopefully we are changing. We're also changing the efficiency of the process for college admissions officers and how it imports into their system, how they can read it, a lot of different ways like this that we thought we could probably be a little different, as you were saying. The other thing that I'd say, because you asked me the differences, it's a little bit of a shorter test because it's computer adaptive. So we don't need to spend 2 hours asking you questions that are way above your level or way beneath your level. We can adapt to you. Each individual test will adapt to the individual user. And then we also are the only test out there with a full access program. So we give away thousands and thousands of tests for free to universities to disseminate to students in need who cannot afford a test, as well as partnering with hundreds of CBOs and community-based organizations around the world, like Holly or Syrian Youth Assembly or Ukrainian Scholars Foundation, or whatever that might be, to make sure that students who really have no option, but again, have that desire to learn, have that desire to be curious, really do want to come to university, have a chance to take an English proficiency test.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Lisa, if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners around studying foreign language or accessing Duolingo to help you with that, would love for you to have a final word here.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, sort of coming back to the study abroad point as well, is that, one thing that study abroad, but also just learning a foreign language in the classroom really helps you with is being more adaptable and flexible. And I think I probably said this before, but, being able to kind of cope with change and transition. And that's something that anybody who's thinking about going to college is going to have to do, right? You're about to embark on probably one of the biggest changes of your life to date. And being able to do so while remaining open-minded and being willing to adjust to that change, meet new people from different backgrounds, connect with them, have empathy for them and what they're going through, will help you in your relationships. It will help you in your studies. And I think learning a foreign language just kind of helps you practice that on a day-to-day basis. You might not even realize, because you're so focused on learning the vocabulary or memorizing the grammar, that you don't realize that one thing that you're also doing in that world language classroom is adopting someone else's perspective every day by speaking their language, learning about how people do things in different parts of the world or from different cultures, and learning how to respect that or observe it without judgment. And those are the types of skills that you're going to need when you go away to college if you're going to be successful there. So I would encourage everybody to stick with it, because it is a skill that you lose if you don't practice it. And this won't be the last transition. This won't be the last major change that society undergoes while you're living in it. And so being able to have a strong muscle that makes you adaptable and flexible is really important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's true. And we're all preaching to each other and preaching to the choir, but hopefully our listeners are hearing us as well, that there's more to this than simply just, it's going to look good on your college applications. But if that's all you care about right now, it's going to look good on your college applications, but there's more to it than that. John and Lisa, thank you both so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it. Best of luck to all the students out there in the process.
Yes, for sure. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about working in college, something I am also passionate about. So don't go away.